Welcome to the CanMed Coffee Talk podcast, where we talk with the leading minds in cannabis science, medicine, cultivation, and safety testing. I am your host, Ben Amirault. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Medicinal Genomics and proud member of the team that puts on the CanMed Conference. So we are back from our summer break. I hope you didn't miss us too much. We are also working hard on finalizing the details for our CanMed 25 event, which will be announced very soon. So if you haven't yet, please go to canmedevents.com now and sign up for email alerts so you can get that announcement once it's made. We are also putting the finishing touches on the CanMed 24 video presentations, and we'll be adding those to the CanMed archive very soon as well. So if you're on the email list, you'll get that notification as well. My guest today is Zach Ricciardi. He is a cannabis specialist working with BioSafe Systems, which is a company that produces environmentally sustainable products to protect crops, water, and people. Zach regularly puts out content on social media under the name Zach the Grow Guy, where he shares his extensive knowledge of production and plant health that he has accrued over the years working with all types of growers. Zach also authored the book Clean Growing, Integrated Pest Management for Cannabis Growers, The Ultimate Guide to Clean Crops, and Safe Cultivation Practices that Protect Growers and Consumers. During our conversation, we discuss what is IPM and why is it important to cannabis growers, how Zach got involved with IPM for cannabis, how cannabis growers can implement IPM into their operations, common pests and pathogens that cannabis growers are battling, common mistakes cannabis growers make when it comes to IPM, and more. Before we get to my conversation with Zach, I'd like to thank this episode's sponsor, Advanced Nutrients. Founded in 1999, Advanced Nutrients was the first to develop a complete nutrient system that unlocks the true genetic potential of the cannabis plant. Since its inception, the brand has introduced more than 50 innovations to the cultivation community and continues to revolutionize the space through proprietary scientific discoveries. Learn more at advancednutrients.com. Okay, and without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Zach Ricciardi. Good morning, Zach. Thanks so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you, Ben. I really appreciate you having me on here, and shout out to Medical Genomics for putting this on.
All right. Appreciate that. Yeah, I'm excited to talk with you today about integrated pest management for cannabis cultivation. It's a topic that you've literally wrote the book on. And we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But how I became familiar with you is I was actually sitting at the cultivation workshop at CanMed 24, which was just a few weeks ago or in May. And IPM came up during the panel conversation. And one of the panelists, I don't recall who it was, but mentioned you and your book, Clean Growing, Integrated Pest Management for Cannabis Growers, The Ultimate Guide to Clean Crops and Safe Cultivation Practices that Protect Growers and Consumers. Mentioned that specifically and said that, you are the person to talk to and you are the guy when it comes to IPM. So I quickly jotted that name down and made sure to reach out to you to get you on the podcast. So I'm so happy that you're here today. So maybe just to get us started, kind of set the scene, tell us a bit about your background, how you got into cannabis IPM and why it's important.
So I kind of fell into cannabis IPM almost out of necessity. I've been in love with cannabis my entire life and grew up in Colorado. When I turned 18, I basically moved out to California to kind of chase the cannabis cultivator dream, and operated under SB 420 and Prop 215 in the state of California for a while. I was able to kind of get on with the Gardening Unlimited crew, who were the guys that, were basically selling the supplies. And that really kind of kindled my passion for the, why, not just the what. There's a lot of cannabis growers that follow charts, but they never ask, why are we doing this?
Mm.
And, I just kind of wanted to take that deeper delve. Originally being from Colorado, when our industry here started to, snowball and blow up, I had a lot of people telling me that I needed to come home. And so I actually ran a smaller hydroponic store in Golden, Colorado for, I want to say about 2 years. I ran it from the day that it opened to the day that it moved to Boulder. When the owner decided that they were going to relocate, it was time for us to just kind of separate paths. And so I actually painted bikes for Harley Davidson for a little while
Wow.
before I got on with a company called ACW Supply here in Denver, Colorado. They are Colorado's oldest wholesale grower supply. They've been around since 1893. And being a counter guy there really kind of jump started my IPM path, I guess we could say, because I was able to talk to many different aspects of growers in a single day. And this is when cannabis was really starting to snowball in Colorado. But being the counter guy, I would talk to a potato grower, a poinsettia grower, and a hemp grower and a cannabis grower all on the same day, and they all had the same issue. And so I was kind of able to conglomerate that knowledge and make suggestions across different fields of horticulture and say, well, this sector's trying this sector's trying this. And then Colorado came out with what is called the approved list, which is basically a list of pesticides, fungicides, bactericides that are safe to put on a consumable crop like cannabis. And being in the very early days, being involved in seeing what that list was looking like, I was able to put together a very comprehensive approach for cannabis growers in a commercial environment to rotate their chemistries effectively so that they're able to maximize their productivity and man hours, because there's a lot of stuff on these lists that's kind of misleading or confusing. And so being able to, again, emanate that knowledge from large scale growers and be able to break down an acre to, a 4x8 table really helped me out in terms of being able to make some of this stuff understandable for the industry. And, there was a long time ago, there was this mentality in cannabis where if you got certain ailments, you just chop down and start over.
Mm.
Well, traditional growers don't have that luxury, and being able to see that and say, like, a cucumber grower can't clean out their greenhouse because they got powdery mildew and start from scratch. They would go bankrupt. They have to have something that could eliminate this powdery mildew, especially if they're organic certified. So there has to be a solution out there. We just hadn't found it yet. And, being able to work with some of the largest grows in the United States at this point, I feel that the BioSafe SOP, it does have some ancillary products on there, because I always say, I'd never hire an electrician to put in a toilet for me. We have the foundation covered very, very well. And depending on the unique scenario, there are some ancillary products from, I don't necessarily want to call them competitors. I will say other producers of similar, organic pesticides, fungicides, insecticides. They fit into the program very well so that the grower can be successful. Any one company that's telling you that they have all the answers is just trying to take your money. I think one of the reasons I was probably brought up on this panel is because I want growers to be successful. I will often recommend things to complement our program that BioSafe doesn't manufacture. And that's because I want you to be able to eliminate this issue and also have that feather in your cap, so to speak. Because if this comes up again, you know what to do. To come full circle, those growers that their mentality was to just chop down and start over, well, the next time this happens, now you've lost 2 crops.
Right. So now, is your solution more of a kind of reactive, I have a problem, I need to address it? Or is it preventative? Is it both?
I always, preach preventative over curative, but there are scenarios where, things find their way in. And so in the book, Clean Growing, I do have preventative measures as well as curative measures. And the idea is that growers just get used to the idea of IPM. Unfortunately, it's kind of been the redheaded stepchild of the industry, and it doesn't really matter until it matters. And then it's the only thing that matters, because growers freak out and they start spending a bunch of money trying to eliminate issues that will compromise the quality of their end product, where the best plan would be to have something in place ahead of time. Stuff still finds its way through. ACs fail, lights go out, people quit. There's ancillary stuff that we always have to deal with beyond what the plants are doing. But just like we have to water these plants, we also have to spray them and be that intermediary, because we've created a perfect environment for these plants. We've also created a perfect environment for pests, because there's no natural predation in these facilities. And so a root aphid, a spider mite, a thrip finds its way in. That growth curve is exponential unless we're spraying, because they're just going to grow unchecked. So just like we need to water these plants, we need to make sure that we have a program in place to where we are that intermediary to go after anything that could find its way into the garden. And again, recommending some other companies' stuff with cannabis, I really only like to spray up until about week 3 of flower, unless it's absolutely necessary. At that point, we can deploy BCAs, which are our biological control agents, such as our beneficial insects, our nematodes, basically using Mother Nature to combat whatever else we could find in that garden. Um, it allows growers to actually have a successful approach in that aspect because they know what they're targeting at that point. If you've been spraying these plants from propagation all the way up until about week 3 and you're in that environment, you know what kind of pests you're dealing with. So, for example, if we're dealing with 2-dotted spider mites, you know that you need Persimolis and Californicus to be able to eliminate that issue. Being in that garden and spraying isn't just trying to eliminate it, it's also scouting, it's prepping, it's note taking, it's allowing you to basically set up that next week for the most amount of success that you can possibly have. And by, basically spraying up until that week 3 cutoff, week 3 roughly, it's when we transition from stretching into setting. So there are some varieties that might be a little later, there's some varieties that might be a little sooner. But basically, we want to make sure that we're addressing that wide array of stuff that could find its way in, because while BCAs work very, very well, Ben, they're specialized. Again, plumbers put in toilets, electricians put in circuits. Not all beneficial insects are going to go after everything. So when you see people deploy ladybugs and they say they have spider mites, that's great that you introduced a bunch of ladybugs and they may eat some of those spider mites, but it's not a specialized food source for that, insect. And so you're kind of wasting money at that point. By being in the garden and having these notes and knowing what happened last week, you can tailor your approach next week so that you are going to have the most success you possibly can.
Excellent. All right, before we get too deep into it, I'm hoping, can you explain or define what is integrated pest management?
Integrated pest management to me is all things growing. It's not just a position that one person is assigned at the garden. It's literally on the entire team. While there's one person that's probably doing the sprays and doing the logs and doing the heavy lifting, IPM is on everyone. If we've got a lazy team of trimmers and they go into a dirty environment and then they go into veg, well, then we just contaminated veg. So we have to educate the entire workforce that's at a facility, at a grow, at a garden, that IPM is on everybody. We have to move consciously. We have to think about what we're doing, and we have to try to eliminate cross-contamination wherever possible. We always go to our cleanest areas first. If we have, potential issues, I always am a proponent of using irrigation marker flags so that you can tell everybody on the team that there's an issue that you've spotted without having to verbally say anything to anybody. Anybody that walks into that room, if they see a red flag sticking out of a pot, whatever your facility deemed the red flag notates to, they'll look at that and say, hey, I need to avoid that area until I'm done in this room. That way I'm not contaminating everything. IPM is a cultural practice of cleanliness across the board, and it is a preventative as well as curative approach to eliminate issues that could, possibly facilitate themselves in a horticulture environment.
And how does that differ from like traditional pest control methods?
Really, the only difference between cannabis IPM and what we'll call traditional IPM is the types of chemistries that are used and the longevity of said chemistries. Because cannabis is a consumable, most of the stuff that is going to be sprayed on cannabis is going to be what they call GRAS, or generally regarded as safe. You're not going to see the long-lived systemic pesticides that they'll use on ornamentals because they're poisonous. I'm sure you've been around for a long enough period of time. Everybody's heard of Eagle 20. Mm-hmm. Eagle 20 is a chemistry that is used in traditional horticulture, and it's not necessarily the boogeyman in that aspect because people aren't combusting it. Myclobutanol, or Eagle 20, really becomes dangerous once it's lit on fire. You create benzene and hydrocarbon once it's combusted. And so for a cannabis crop, it's not a good fit. But if you were to spray it on your leafy greens, your tomatoes, whatever, because those are on the label, it goes through your digestive tract and it's unchanged. It doesn't have that carboxyl group. Basically, it's like with THCA and Delta 9. You know how when you light THC on fire, it becomes, Delta 9? Same premise. So, having some of these chemistries that are in traditional horticulture, they're not necessarily as safe and they don't have the residuals. So cannabis growers have to be a little bit more diligent and educated in terms of what the spray that they're doing right now is going to do and how that next spray they're going to do is going to either complement or contradict what they just did. For example, you would never want to spray a biological inoculant and then spray a sanitizer. But if you did it in the adverse and you sprayed a sanitizer and then a biological inoculant, the inoculant will actually perform better because you're putting it onto a clean tissue environment where it can colonize and spread much easier than if you were to try to put it onto a dirty environment and then follow up with a sanitizer a couple days later and kill all those spores. So a lot of it is just the rotation of certain chemistries and, making sure that you're using as different of mode of action as we possibly can. We don't necessarily have that same IRAC group classification that traditional horticulture has, where it says, this is the IRAC group 3, it does this, this, and this. This is the IRAC group 4, it does this, this, and this. A lot of the pesticides and fungicides that cannabis growers have are going to be contact or very short-lived. And so knowing how to play those off of one another so that the grower has the most success allows them to basically stack an IPM regimen to where, again, every spray is complementing the one that preceded it.
Great. So now, integrated pest management. Now, do you include like plant pathogens within that sort of definition there? So, your hoplite and viroid and fusarium, pythium, all those sort of things?
A pest can be anything from, a single-celled organism. Viroids are very, very small, 25 to 50 nanometers in size, all the way up to, bang aphids that are, the size of a BB almost. There's a whole different slew of stuff that can attack the plants. And basically, pest management is going to be you being the intermediary for everything from, the stuff you see to the stuff you can't.
Mm. And so how unique is sort of the program to each facility? Is there sort of a general protocol that they should be following, or is it very specific?
So in the book, I have what I kind of call the recipe for bread, which is just the basic outline of the rotation of a growth regulant style chemistry, which is more than likely going to be azadirachtin in cannabis. What I like to call the heavy hitters, which are going to be your myco-insecticides like your Bavaria bassiana, your Burkholderia, your Asaria formosea, your Metaheresium type chemistries. And then on Fridays, just so we can keep the pressure on the button, so to speak, and depending on the scenario, that's when we would use either like a sulfur, a citric acid, or possibly an insecticidal soap. And so each scenario is a little bit different, but it allows the grower to basically tailor their approach to best fit what they're dealing with at that point in time. And because the base of the program really doesn't change a whole lot, it allows them to be able to make minute changes while still staying on, same basic premise, so that, your guys aren't saying like, oh, we did this last week and now we're over here doing something completely different. There's a few minute changes that occur, but the nice thing about it is that it's broad enough that it can address most of the issues that we're trying to do. And again, if we're doing this as a preventative, then we don't have to get into that necessarily specialized section of it where it's like, okay, we're dealing with russet mites specifically, or we're dealing with root aphids. And that's when we make little changes. But, for a general just overview SOP of just trying to keep things clean, it's pretty universal.
Right. So no, I'm glad you said that. So, because I know, in researching kind of IPM, there's all these articles that kind of talk about the different tenets of it, and it can be for anywhere from 4 to 6 to whatever. But I know that one of the main ones is the whole idea of identification and monitoring, which is sort of like what you had talked about before. So what are some of the signs that growers should be looking for in order to sort of identify a problem before it, snowballs out of control?
One thing that I always try to have growers do is empower their staff, because a grower is only one person, and there in any given facility, there's thousands of plants possibly, but you have people that are looking at those plants every single day. Empower your staff to come to you. They don't need to be an expert necessarily, but they know when something's not right. If that plant looks different than it did yesterday, have them come tell you, and then you can figure it out. It's one of those things that if you don't allow your staff, like, I don't want you to have your staff think that they're making a mistake. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of times people will not go and tell the head grower that something's amiss because they don't want it to come back on them. Like, oh, well, then you did this type of thing. Empower your people to say, like, if there's anything that's off, let's figure it out. If this plant looks different than it did yesterday, if it's got purple stems, if it's got stippling on the leaves, if the, turgidity is gone and the leaves are starting to curl down, if they're starting to curl up, like anything that just looks amiss, allow your, how do I put it? Like, you don't necessarily have to have a team of master growers. You just got to have a team of diligent people. And as long as there's one person on staff that, can say like, okay, there's an issue, let me go see it. Like most facilities have one maintenance guy that fixes ACs. It's not on everybody to do it. So if you have one guy that's responsible for plant health and pathogen mitigation, when somebody finds something, he can say, hey, I got to go tell Ben what I just found. And then, it could be that they topped it funny. It could be that it's HLV. It could be that there's an actual issue going on beyond that, but having the ability and that communication between your team is paramount, because those are the guys that are in the trenches, so to speak. And, you got to empower your team to let you know what's going on, because again, the head grower is only in one spot at one time, and having the ability to have a team that can relay real world information to you, very quickly helps a lot. That flag system that I was mentioning a little bit, that really helps a lot, because a head grower can stick his head in a room and count flags in 30 seconds. And that's a great way to, also track progress. If we had 10 red flags last week and this week we're down to 5, then what we're doing is working. We need to continue on that process that we have implemented. If we are at 15 red flags this week and last week we only had 10, then we need to switch it up because it's getting worse. And so communication is, I think, the most important part of integrated pest management to me.
Yeah, the communication definitely seems important. And like you said, it's a culture, right? And so how common is that, the culture in cannabis cultivation? Like, is it becoming more of a thing?
I see more and more operations becoming more and more regimented in terms of how they do things. And whether it's state regulations that have kind of facilitated that change, or people just realizing that they have to run leaner because the market isn't what it was. Having the ability to educate staff and, get them all on the same page and empower people, I think is the way that the successful grows are going. If you punish your employees for trying to do their best, they're not going to want to work for you.
Right. Right. All right. I want to talk to you about what are some of the common pests or problems that cannabis growers just always seem to be dealing with?
I would say the 4 most common things that I run into traveling the country are going to be thrips, root aphids, hop latent viroid, and powdery mildew. Thrips can be kind of a problem because a lot of times folks will only attack one life cycle stage of this infestation. Thrips actually have a point where they live in the canopy, and they have a point where they live in the strata of your media. And so if you're not treating both, you're going to see these ebbs and flows where they're gone for 2 weeks, they come back, they're gone for 2 weeks, they come back. And so, educating growers that doing a sprench application with thrips really does allow them to get ahead of it. Root aphids are extremely hard to get rid of just because they're incredibly adept at what people have been throwing at them. What I've found to be the most effective method to attack root aphids is to actually do an irrigation cycle before you do any drenches or sprays. They run away from that moisture of the first irrigation cycle of the day. If we can get those pots wet and get them complacent to the fact that that moisture is there, they're less apt to try to run away. And so whatever we're putting out via a drench, sprench, or spray is going to have much better likelihood of actually coming in contact with them, because they're not just trying to run from it. Hop latent viroid is something that a lot of growers have it, but they don't know they have it until they have it. And again, this comes back to that cultural practices thing, and it kind of falls on everybody and just the communication. That viroid can be transferred via dirty matter, it can be transferred mechanically. So it goes from one plant to another, doesn't wash his hands. It can be spread by tools. It can be spread by runoff. It can be spread by insects. It is a very prevalent pathogen, and a lot of folks don't take it as seriously as they should. There are some grows that have completely realized that it can decimate their business, and they will test their moms before they take cuts every single round, and they're doing everything they need to. And then there are growers that still use a single cup of Clonex and dip every single cut in that same hormone. And it's like, if there's any contamination, you guys just spread it across the board. So, honestly, I feel like the viroids and pathogens are going to be the hardest thing for the cannabis industry to address, because you don't know that you have them until you have them. And once you have them, we can go into remission, so to speak. We can, get it to a point where the plant can still finish, but those genetics are contaminated at that point. And to keep them on board would be to, facilitate the downfall of everything else that you have in your stable. Because again, that can transfer so many different ways and so easily. And the thing that a lot of the latent portion of this viroid, if your plants are healthy, you're not going to see what it can do right away. But over time, the plant health starts to go down. It's almost like cancer. The patient isn't necessarily bedridden when they're first diagnosed, but the longer they are alive, That line goes like this, and the sicker they become. And, to compromise an entire business with HLV is just, it's very scary because it will compromise your harvest. Your THC percentages plummet, your bag appeal goes down, and the medicinal value of the plant is just not there anymore. You're basically growing hemp at that point. Like, you're compliant with the farm bill almost. um,
So
the
no,
I'm sorry,
no, I never thought of it that way.
the last, most common pathogen that I see is powdery mildew, just because it is very prevalent. It's easy to pop up. It's not the end of the world. A lot of times growers won't do everything they need to do to eliminate said issue, but it is something that can be gotten rid of fairly easily. First thing I always tell people is make sure your environment's on point. If you can't set your temp to 60 and your DHU to 10 and then hit those numbers, your environment isn't where it needs to be. There are folks that say, oh, I can get it to where it needs to be. And if you can't hit those parameters, it's not. And so the first thing growers have to do is make sure that their HVAC is up to point, their, air conditioning is up to point, their DHU is where it needs to be. And if they're still experiencing powdery mildew, that's when we say, okay, let's look at what we can spray to, basically kind of hinder this thing in its tracks. And we've got some really cool options for cannabis growers that have, very safe application methods and, zero residual aspects in terms of dangerous stuff. And it just allows them to basically get on that schedule of like, okay, it's flip, we got to spray oxyphos and xylitol, or it's Wednesday, we got to hit a myco insecticide. And to touch on what you kind of said earlier, in my program, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for preventative is spray days. Tuesday and Thursday is plant work and scouting. And then once we get from basically curative into preventative. I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I said preventative, but I meant curative. Once we get into the preventative mode, we actually flip it. And Monday, Wednesday, Friday, we're doing scouting. Tuesday, Thursday, we're doing our sprays. But the idea is that you're in there looking at the plants as much as you're spraying or defoliating or doing anything else, because we have to evaluate our progress and keep a lot of logs. If we don't write down what we're doing in a month, we won't remember what we did. We don't know if we did anything right or not. Grows are very cyclical in terms of what happened last June, likely is going to happen this June. And so if you can go back to your log last year and say, shit, we had thrips on the 14th when it got really hot. And then you look at your calendar and you say, okay, it's going to get up to, 102 or whatever. I'm anticipating thrips. You could put out your Ambicilius, Cucumaris, beneficial insects and later flower, and then do your sprays in your veg and your prop and your early flower and combat the, thrips before they ever even get established.
Right. No, I wanted to go back to when you were talking about the pathogens, and it sounded like one of the main challenges with that is you don't really know you have it until it's too late. So in that sense, do you sort of advocate for regular testing? Full disclosure, Medicinal Genomics, we develop qPCR assays for hop latent viroid, Fusarium, Pythium, a lot of the plant pathogens that folks use. And, we're trying to spread the word to growers that, should make that part of their program to do testing. Is that something that you would agree with?
Definitely. Every other aspect of horticulture that is traditional does tissue testing. If you go to a tomato grower greenhouse, they're doing it once a week. They don't know how to adjust their feeds if they don't know what the plant's uptaking and what it's not. And, that's nutritional analysis, but being able to have this pathogen testing is paramount. If you have a dirty genetic and you put 2,000 clones into production, that's a loss, because that 2,000 clones with where the market is now, you're going to spend more money, labor, and time than you're going to be able to recoup off of that crop at that point, if you can even sell it, because it's not going to come out looking like it should. I'm an advocate of, having a test allows us to make educated decisions. If we don't know what we're dealing with, then we're just throwing stuff at the wall to see what sticks. Every time you cut clones, if you bring in something new, even quarterly, test your stable just to make sure everything is where it's supposed to be. But anything that comes in brand new should always be quarantined and tested. And then those, plants should have clones cut off of them. And as long as those clones off of the plants you brought in look okay, then we can put it into production. But that's a mistake I've seen time and time again, where growers are excited to get some hype genetic, they put it into production right away, and then they're like, shit, I just infected half of my stable with XYZ.
Right. No, and now going back to the pests, I know another thing that I sort of saw in my research too was this idea of setting thresholds. So is there like a certain amount of pest that's sort of like okay as long as we can manage it and keep it down, or
I mean, in a perfect world, brother, the perfect number would be zero.
Yeah.
But this is farming, and we're in a fluid environment where you've got people coming in and out of the facility all day long. You know, depending on the type of facility, if it's a greenhouse, every time you open your louvers to ventilate the greenhouse, we've potentially introduced contamination. And so the M in IPM stands for management. You're never going to completely be ahead of everything. You will always have something to do the next day because nature never quits. You know, it will always try to find its way in or, you know, do its best to stifle what it is we're trying to do. And so, you know, the acceptable level is low pressure, but, you know, don't get complacent and say, oh, we've got mites, but they're not that bad. You know, we've got mites, but we're treating them as the right approach. Once you get complacent with something, that's when other issues start to snowball. And so low pressure isn't unacceptable, but, you know, make sure that you're doing your best to get that to as close to no pressure as you can. And again, because it's farming, if we wipe one issue out, Ben, something else is going to pop up tomorrow. That's just the nature of the beast.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So winding down here, I'm curious, are there some common mistakes that growers make when they're implementing IPM that they could avoid?
The most common mistake that I see is that growers don't necessarily look at active ingredients. They're just looking at brand names. And so, you know, one time I went to a facility here in Denver and the grower had clarified hydrophobic extract of neem oil as a duractin and neem oil. And those are all basically the exact same thing, just different versions of the exact same product. And he was wondering why he wasn't having success with his issue. And it's like, well, brother, you're using three versions of the same stuff. You know, being able to differentiate between actives really allows growers to get those different modes of action and, you know, making sure that they are pHing their sprays at the end of it is something that I've seen some growers neglect to do. Like they'll pH their reservoirs every time, but they won't pH their sprays for whatever reason. I feel like that sometimes is a whoopsie. And the other thing that I see a lot of growers do, man, and this is not knocking anybody, but you know, water quality isn't necessarily the best in some places of the country. So growers will spray with RO water, and RO, as you know, is acidic. Comes out of the machine at 7, but you let it sit for 24 hours, it's going to be a pH of something like 5.5. And then they add something like citric acid to it, it's going to be a pH of something like 3. You spray a pH of 3 on your plants, man, you're going to see some phyto and burn some stuff. And so what I typically recommend to growers is if you've got really dirty water and you cannot spray with tap, take some of your base NPK, spike it to about 0.3 EC. Get a little bit of that bicarbonate content from that fertilizer back into that water column. And that way, if you do have to buffer it or add something else to it, it's not going to have the drastic swings that it would without that bicarbonate content. Anytime growers are spraying Xeritol, I tell them if you're using RO, spike it to 0.3 EC, then they add the Xeritol, and 9 out of 10 times it'll fall between 5.5 and 6.2, which is
Great.
for a foliar app.
So looking ahead, are there any advancements or innovations that you're excited about when it comes to IPM?
Definitely. You know, the realm of myco-insecticides is continuing to expand. The nature against nature really is my favorite approach. Mother Nature has been doing this a lot longer than we have, and you know, she's got checks and balances for everything. So being able to utilize more natural products and get further away from petrochemicals and you know stuff that harms pollinators and hurts the environment really is going to, I think, allow pest management to be looked at as not necessarily this big boogeyman. Like anytime you hear the word insecticide, pesticide, people always think Monsanto, Roundup, cancer. And it's like to farm on scale, you have to be able to be that intermediary, but we don't necessarily have to use those chemistries that poison the planet. You know, BioSafe, our mantra is to try to leave the planet better than we found it, man. And, you know, we're able to address a lot of these issues that these gnarly chemicals address, but we do it without hurting the environment. And so in the future, I'm just excited to see more of these really cancerous, you know, gnarly chemistries be replaced by stuff that works, that is safer for the planet and for people.
Excellent. All right. And before I let you go, are there any other resources besides your book, which I will put a link to in the show notes so people can find that on Amazon? But are there other resources, papers, or anything like that that you could recommend that if people are interested in learning more about what it is you do?
We definitely have you know, a really good Instagram page. If you go onto the IGTV tab, when the pandemic first started, I used to do these things called fireside chats, where I would just talk about a different aspect of cultivation. It has everything from trimming to curing to, russet mites and root aphids, like anything and everything I could think of talking about, I did. So anybody that wants to watch free videos, all the stuff that's in the book is also on those videos. It's just sometimes you don't have 8 hours to comb through videos to
Right.
find the answer you're looking for. And then I really recommend that anybody that's serious about the industry get onto a website called MMJ Daily. There's on the horticulture side, it's called Horta Daily, but MMJ Daily is a cannabis specific daily newsletter that gets sent to your inbox, and it talks about cannabis news from all over the world. So you can see what the Netherlands are doing, you can see what Israel is doing, you can see what South Africa is doing, you can see what Germany is doing, you can see what Canada is doing, you can see what we're doing. And it keeps you really abreast of, the what's going on in cannabis as a whole, and gives you that kind of 1,000-yard view of the industry, and allows you to know what's coming before it comes. They a lot of times they'll talk about legislation that's potential, and you'll know about something 6 months before it's talked about on MSNBC or something.
Excellent. Excellent. All right, Zach. Well, thanks again for doing this. I think it was great. And hopefully we can see you out at CanMed once we announce the details for that. I'd love to see you there.
Heck yeah, brother, keep me posted. Thank you so much for having us on, and enjoy your weekend. Okay.
All right, we'll do.